Everyone keeps secrets. Sometimes it's the only way to protect the ones we love.
I know you. God Killer. What is it you want from me? Is it a god of war you came to find?
You don't really want war, do you, Kratos? All that blood on your hands? On your son's hands?
What is it you will not tell me?
I can't talk about it, but I just need you to trust me.
We follow your every whim.
But you don't believe in any of it.
And still I follow. Because all that matters is that you are safe.
But that's not all that matters. Who's keeping you safe?
I do not need you to protect me.
You sure about that?
Pretender god!
Ragnarok is over. And I am here to now finally bring my review, spoiler-free review. I'm not going to really get into the really nitty-gritty of what transpires here in God of War Ragnarok, but I'm finally going to bring down my thoughts and overall perceptions of what is, for many to be believed, their game of the year for 2022, God of War Ragnarok. It's between this and Elden Ring, and frankly, I can understand why. I can understand why there's an awful lot of, it's almost like Titans fighting each other in the sense that we have these two. I feel kind of sorry for any game that is not God of War Ragnarok or Elden Ring right now, because that's ultimately where the Game of the Year discussion is formulating, and I'm hoping to throw a little bit of attention and admiration towards other titles that I did manage to play this year come my Game of the Year discussion when we finally get to the proper end of the year towards the end of December. That's one of the things that I do think it's a little unfair for the Game Awards, Jeff Keighley's things to be done so early in December, because there's so much cut off. Like Callisto Protocol doesn't count. Pretty much any game that is released in the early parts of December or late November don't really count. Not that I want it to, but say for example Pokemon doesn't really count towards RPG anymore because it got released after said cutoff. Again, doesn't really deserve it, but it's just something to consider. So, to me, the one that I feel misses out on this whole discussion, at least for the main outlets like IGN, GameSpot, and then of course the Game Awards, a lot of games need to be cut off after a certain while, and it looks like Callisto Protocol is that sacrifice, much like Smash Ultimate was back in 2018. So that's something that I wish was a little fixed. But let's go ahead and talk about one of the games that is being talked about, God of War Ragnarok, before we go off on any other tangents, because I am at the risk of going into my own tangents within the actual basis of this game, which I finally rolled credits on. The true credits I should probably be distinguishing here, because there's a extra way to get a much more complete experience out of the ending of God of War Ragnarok. And again, no spoilers are going to be on here. You can listen to this at your leisure, whether you're doing on podcast platforms, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, and then of course later on when it goes up on YouTube as a listen-only video, as a video that you can simply just play and listen to in the background, as I now give my review of God of War Ragnarok after pouring about, it's funny because the clock says 39 hours and 45 minutes. Let's go ahead and just round off to 40 hours even, especially since I learned a little earlier in the game that the clock doesn't count, I believe it doesn't count cutscenes. It doesn't count menus for sure. I tested this out. I know this for a fact because I went into the upgrade system, left it there for a good 10-15 minutes while I checked stuff on my phone, and then when I went back to the main pause menu that has the clock in it, it didn't go up whatsoever, so that's how I was able to attribute that. As far as cutscenes, I don't know. So that's why I'm like, okay, I'm pretty certain I spent way more than 15 minutes, probably more than an hour, cumulatively wise, in upgrade menus and such. So after 40 hours, I can confidently give my review, which, here's the thing. 4 years later, we get our sequel to the 2018 reboot, which I am of the camp was a step in the right direction for a character like Kratos, and how it set up the bigger scope going into Norse mythology versus Greek mythology. But more importantly, there were more opportunities for the character of Kratos to grow, giving him a son, giving him a much more somber tone, giving him a different mythology, and then also just giving a different approach to the gameplay instead of being just this kind of arcade, I don't want to say top down, but very pulled back, third person action, just heavy action, hack and slash sort of gameplay style. It's a bit more on the action RPG side, with the camera being a little bit more over the shoulder, the button mechanics being mapped to that kind of like a shooter where you have the bumpers and the triggers to fall back on, as opposed to just the simple button mashing and quick time events that we were I don't want to say repetitively doing, but doing very frequently in the original games. And I was a big proponent, a big supporter of that direction, because despite being very, very fun and awesome and badass games, those original God of War trilogy, Kratos was a douche, all right? There was no denying that Kratos was an asshole, and he was just a very empty shell of a character that we just played as to just have fun and to just kind of vent as we tore things limb from limb, quite literally. So to have the reboot kind of acknowledge that, yeah, Kratos was an asshole, and now we need to mature along with him. Again, that was a step in the right direction for the times, and also a very poignant turn of events, or turning of the page for like a director like Cory Barlog, who took on that project after directing God of War 2. So Thor being in that hidden ending and credit scene, which I'm pretty certain the majority of people have already played through, so that's the only little spoiler that I'll go ahead and throw it out there for the 2018 game. Outside of that, I'm not really gonna divulge into all that stuff, but Thor's tease in the end credit scene, hidden within that ending, was a perfect way to set up the scope and the magnitude that we were pretty much, led into believing for a game such as God of War Ragnarok. But it was a big question mark for myself and for a lot of other players as to why there was so much secrecy around God of War Ragnarok, because there was that initial tease back in 2021, and then it was just radio silent, or was it late 2020, with an original 2021 release date, and then it got delayed into 2022, as like 2021 was about to wrap. We were like in September, and they were still very quiet, and finally we got a confirmation that it got punted into 2022. And being that we were already in October, November, we were like, okay, well, it's definitely not early 2022. And then we started to get more state of plays, more gameplay stuff, but none of it really divulged into more of the broader details of what the story was about. All we got was just teases and little teaspoons of what the plot was going to really deal with, which is, of course, Atreus trying to figure out a little bit more about himself. I'll leave it at that. And Kratos trying to figure out a really, I guess you could say, really well thought out work-life balance as far as being a father, but also dealing with the shit that could probably hit the fan upon the entirety of the 9 realms in this Norse mythology, or at least this take on Norse mythology, and how everything could go to, as the title suggests, Ragnarok. And so it's pretty much him trying to balance that as to whether or not when to trust Atreus with this quest of like figuring out more about himself. Oh, well, certain things are out to get him, especially things that are repercussions of what they left in their wake in the original 2018 game. Let's just leave it at that. And the entire time, I just kept thinking to myself, okay, like a lot of people have played the game. It was very fast selling. The numbers show it. Why so much the secrecy? Why is a lot of it being held back towards the last second, to the point where I didn't even think that the game was going to be released in 2022 either? Only for then to confirm and reconfirm that the game is meeting a late holiday 2022 release date, finally confirming November 9th. And then sometime, I think it was either late September or early October, Santa Monica Studios tweeted that the game had gone gold. And I was like, I still feel like it's really surreal that we don't really see much gameplay. We saw gameplay, but it was always like in quick spurts. There was never like this full... They never did the thing that even the original 2018 game did, where they showed a full slice of gameplay of like Cory Barlog playing the game for like a straight 10 minutes. They never did that with Ragnarok. It was always just these montaged bits in a like a 2.5 minute trailer, What was all the secrecy about? Well, after finally playing the game, I understand. I definitely understand how much of a better experience this is to go into it fresh and as blind as humanly possible. I was actually pretty surprised that I really didn't get much of the game, and I feel blessed in saying this. I'm definitely counting my blessings here, that I was able to go into this game as fresh that I was and as non-spoiled as I was. I would probably say the closest to a spoiler would probably be that the weekend that it came out, and this could be seen as a bit of a complaint, a little bit of a Karen moment for myself, that I went on Twitch. And you know how when you go on Twitch, sometimes people are streaming a game and the thumbnail that shows up is exactly where they are in the game, so that could sometimes show a spoiler in the thumbnail because Twitch just chose that moment to use as a thumbnail. And sadly, that weekend that the game came out, Girlfriend Reviews was playing the game, and they were playing the game a bit much. And because of that, when I hopped on Twitch to go, not to see their stream, I wanted to go to check out somebody else's stream. But sadly, when I opened the app, it showed Girlfriend Reviews at the top because they were the most viewed. And the thumbnail did show me a particular aspect of the gameplay. Not the story, thank God, but just the gameplay that I was like, okay, that would have been nice to not know about that. And then there was a picture on Twitter that showed a fraction of the end credits rolling, but nothing else, that was, like I said, too spoilery. And now after completing the game, I can understand why, because just 2 hours in and some shit already gets revealed and gets kind of heavy as far as emotion, as far as plot, as far as character development. And there's really no way to talk about the plot because things are just happening at least at the beginning, at a very quick pace. But the pace definitely feels a little bit different than that of the 2018 game. It kind of the same, but still different. Kind of like how James Franco's character says in the interview that's been memed a handful of times, where he's like, same but different, but still same. It's kind of like an amalgamation of all those things, and one of the things that kind of brings that to light is the fact that Cory Barlog is not necessarily the main director of this game like he was in the original 2018 game. He's still the creative director, and he's still lending a lot of creative ideas as far as, things that come to light as far as their interpretation of Norse mythology, maybe a character design, things like that. I don't know the specifics of what he came up with, but he's still a creative director. He's just not the main director. The main director this time was Eric Williams. He was pretty much the one that says directed by and stepping in the role that Cory Barlog left empty. It's almost like the equivalent of like when the director of the first movie of a trilogy or something like that steps back but still stays on as a writer and producer for like the sequel, and then the director of the sequel was the writer of the first one, but now they're kind of alternating, kind of like maybe the original Star Wars trilogy or something like that. And this kind of takes a few elements and notes of that in terms of progressing the characters forward and making sure that they go in the direction that they need to for a sequel. And with this change from Barlog to Williams, you can kind of feel a little bit of the subtle changes of how it presents itself, and without changing too much. One of those clear examples is that this game is still emulating the one-take shot illusion that the first game was doing, where it makes it look like it's all one take, so the camera's never quote-unquote cutting. Except this time it's a little bit less fluid or a little less seamless, because the first game was a whole lot more seamless because it almost felt like it was running in real time. Let's just say there's areas in this game where it was obviously not going to be able to do it in real time, so the camera is still going in that illusion to try to feed into that illusion of it being one take shot, but it has to take liberties as far as illusions and lighting and things switching, that it kind of breaks away a little bit away from that. But it's still retaining that technique. Despite having much looser sensibilities, it still takes advantage of that tracking shot illusion to linger on character moments that are still much more emotionally driven, powerful, and somber, especially when the shit goes down and the camera and as well as the narrative structure knows when to linger on a moment and be like, hey, this is a character moment. We're not just gonna breeze on it like a Michael Bay movie. It's actually going to squeeze as much juice out of this moment as possible. And I like that it was mature enough to still know when to do that and when to progress the narrative forward without replacing it for big spectacle. But that's the funny part, is that big spectacle is actually much bigger and more blockbustier than the first, with crazy camera work. Like, even though it's not breaking away and still trying to retain that illusion, the camera goes a bit more crazy in this one. It's not as, I would even argue it's not as cinematic as the first one in terms of being quote-unquote realistic. Sometimes it goes in crazy and dynamic areas that the first game wouldn't have done so, but it at least does lend to more bombastic and blockbuster moments. And because of that, it has much more evocative set pieces that just left me going, holy shit! I guess you could say more holy shit moments as far as action set pieces, as far as, like I said, spectacle and scope as far as where to make things bigger when they need to be. That's one of the things that I'm really grateful for this game, is that in you went to go big and went to go home, but in the right way. Not to, throw in the towel, but went to quiet down and actually take a moment with these characters when they make a big decision or say a very pivotal line that either harkens back to the original game as like a bit of a callback to come full circle to, or still, come back to its initial themes that it's still trying to evoke and still trying to retain, as far as trust, forgiveness, when to move on, when to come back, when to do that sort of thing, and when to finally mature as a person and go your own way. And one of the things that also helps that is the graphics, knowing that these are much more impressive than the first game. And of course, that's going to come by a technical default because I am playing this on PS5 on high frame rate mode. I didn't do the fidelity with the 30 FPS because even the game itself knows that there's really not a whole lot of difference as far as how cool the graphics are between fidelity at 30 FPS, which is kind of like that weird jaggedy 30 FPS that I sometimes don't like, versus the fluid 60 and consistent 60 FPS that it was hitting. And to me, that felt like the much more next-gen experience, especially when the game is still at 4K, still looks great. Yeah, there's a little bit of that, like people like Digital Foundry and whatnot like to call that anti-aliasing things that sometimes happen in the background. And you can sometimes see like these little shadowy bits around character models where they're trying to make those compromises to make sure that the game's running at that consistent 60 FPS. But the game is still a motherfucking looker. I mean, it really is. The textures are lush. The environments are beautiful. There's many moments where not only did I catch myself just stopping from walking because I want to look over this vista, over this cliffside, because the snow, even as haunting as it's supposed to look like, it looks amazing. And there's no shortage of diversity as far as some of these environments. I'm not going to go into too much detail, but as the devs have confirmed, so this is not necessarily a spoiler, how the methods of how you do this, it could be considered a spoiler, but basically this game does let you venture into pretty much all 9 realms, as opposed to the first game where some of the realms were closed off. And the amount of diversity in the environments and how you get a sense of how you're traveling to different places is really translated beautifully here, to the point where I thought to myself, unless it's hidden somewhere, I'm kind of bummed out that there's no photo mode. I mean, at least not at launch. I would imagine that at the time of this recording, it's going to be coming in the future via some form of patch or DLC, free DLC at least, I hope. Because I think that was the case with the first game, where it released, they waited, I think, about a month or two before finally implementing story mode. And I kind of understand it, because enough shit goes down in the story that sometimes you don't want the story mode to kind of detract from that narrative experience of like constantly clicking on the sticks or opening up the menu to be like, oh, let me take this picture, and have Kratos and Atreus have this weird expression on their face, especially when something probably really pivotal happened in the story and you don't want to break away from that. So I kind of understand on that from that perspective, but at the same time, some of these environments, man, they just look so amazing that I wish that there really was some form of photo mode to take advantage of that. On the other side of the spectrum, despite being beautifully designed from again from a character design standpoint, from a set design and artwork standpoint, sometimes I'll admit that the character animations look a little video gamey. You know, sometimes a character is saying something that's very, again, somber and very emotional, and they kind of have like this hesitance in their voice, and you can hear it in their voice, which voice talent across the board is fucking amazing. I mean, what can't already be said about Christopher Judge as Kratos and Sonny Suljic as Atreus, and then everybody else, you know, voice talent behind Freya, behind Thor, Odin, Brock and Sindri, and then all the other characters that get introduced. Everyone is at the top of their game, except maybe, and there are a couple. All of them are good, but some are arguably better than others. There's a couple in particular that just sound good, but they're not like, you know, they almost sound like they know that they're in a game, or they know that they're like, you know, they're in a God of War game. Like, oh my God, you know what I'm saying? Like, they could kind of, you can kind of hear in their voice that they're trying maybe just a little hard, but they're never bad. And often they're just characters that only appear in like one or two scenes. Your main power players are all amazing, and frankly, I feel like this has to be Christopher Judge's year. I mean, you know, you guys have heard in the prior review that I've done in podcast form on the podcast or on the YouTube channel for the podcast that I reviewed A Plague Tale Requiem, and I told myself that I would be mad if the actress behind Amicia did not get nominated, and thankfully she was. But she's also in the same category as Christopher Judge's Kratos, and after playing the game, yeah, it's his award. I'm sorry, but I feel like he's taking it home. Better luck next time, Amicia, should there be a third game. But at least I'm thankful that she's nominated and that she's in that same tier as someone like Christopher Judge. But everyone across the board is amazing in that voice talent. I just sometimes feel like the character animations in-game, not in the cutscenes, but in-game, do look a little video gamey, where they're moving and they're animating in a way that it doesn't look janky, it doesn't look bad, but it just doesn't match up 100% to how they're actually feeling emotionally. Save for one. There was one pivotal area involving Atreus where they actually mapped his face, how he's supposed to look in that moment in game, and I'm like, okay, cool, at least they got that moment right. And while we're on the subject of slight artificial maneuvering sometimes in those cutscenes, despite the characters looking much more emotional and realized, sometimes you can kind of see a little bit of the tricks that are now like, you can now pinpoint the areas where they had to make compromises to keep the illusion of a one-track shot. Like, sometimes you could see a background be diffused as far as lighting, even though you know that the light didn't go down, like torches didn't get put out or the sun didn't go down, but for some reason the background still gets darker. And maybe that's just a thing that I point out. Maybe the casual video gamer will not point this out, but maybe now looking back at 2018, I could be like, okay, well, here's where they can make the transition from gameplay to cutscene a little bit more seamless, because then you can see the textures in the background fuzz out because they defocus it, but because of that, they're able to go into the cutscene and they're able to make those compromises. But again, that might just be a me thing, so this might not apply to every single person who plays this game. But overall, despite that being a bit more obvious than the first game, this is still a technical marvel that anyone who says otherwise, Quantum TV, is, I gotta be honest, you're a little bit questioned. However, the game looking beautiful is not necessarily something that's different from the 2018 game. We knew that. Now, how much of the gameplay has really changed from the original predecessor? Most of it really remains the same, if you really think about it. In fact, to the point where, I don't know if maybe I turned a setting on, or off rather, but it's almost like the game didn't really give me too much tutorials on the basics. It almost assumed that I already knew how to tackle some of the standard fodder that you fight, such as Draugrs and you know those Nordic zombies that you have around Midgar, and just to kind of get you a sense of the ropes, especially if the game almost kind of recognizes that you have played the original game and you jump already by hitting certain buttons, pressing the square, triangle, to be able to command Atreus to shoot his arrows, while at the same time you maneuvering the axe and the blades of chaos. Yes, they're in here. And how to switch between light and heavy attacks with the triggers, bumpers, aiming, etc. A lot of that remained the same, but the game, being a sequel, simply adds and packs on to what was already implemented from an RPG standpoint. Unlike other entries in the mainline God of War series, the game doesn't take away already acquired abilities, so that was a very thankful thing that I was really admiring about the sequel already, is that it didn't pull a God of War 2 where it took all the things that you have acquired in the original game, all these major power-ups, and just stripped them and make you earn them again. None of that really happens here. I don't know if that's considered a spoiler, but the game just takes what was already included and just builds on that, because I think over the years, a lot of us kind of learned that we really do not like that in games, where the game, or the sequel rather, just takes away what was already earned, and it just ruins the fun, because now we have to pretty much repeat the same stuff as always, as before. Instead, just build on what was already established. And I was pretty thankful that Ragnarok was able to do something like that, and simply just flesh out what was already existing there, flesh out the abilities that you had with the Blades of Chaos, the axe, the shield, and of course your Spartan Rage. But this time they added a little bit more to the armor, to the runic abilities, different versions of the runic abilities, and then of course more things to do with the axe and the Blade of Chaos in the skill trees, taking your XP for both Kratos and Atreus and giving yourself new abilities. Obviously not going to mention any specifics, because sometimes witnessing what some of these abilities can do, or how you acquire them, or as you progress forward seeing what kind of damage and what kind of visual spectacle, again going back to the theme of spectacle, what they look like when you actually do activate them, is actually still something that leaves a smile on my face. So I'm going to go ahead and save that up for some of you folks who may have not still gotten a hold of this game just yet, or managed to find the time, or gotten across to that specific runic ability, whether it be light or heavy, that is definitely worthwhile doing some of those side activities, which also make a return here. Besides doing the main path, as the game even calls it, the path, you have your labors, which are basically your milestones, as I like to call them. Basically, you know, killing a certain amount of enemies, or killing a set of enemies using a specific weapon, a specific attack, a maneuver, a combo, etc. And then of course your favors, which range from your usual collectathon stuff, where you have like this numeric sense of how many things you have to kill or gather, these, you know, collectibles and such, to then some actual side quests with narrative implications and stories that actually tell this plot involving the side character, that, you know, take you all across these different areas in these realms that kind of fluctuate between being very linear mapped areas where you know that you need to traverse, climb, even shimmy. That's probably another little nitpick I have with the game, is that sometimes it does shimmy a little too much. It kind of reminds me of how much climbing there is in like Uncharted 4, or how many Jeep areas there are in Uncharted 4. Ragnarok kind of falls a little bit victim to being a little too shimmyful and sometimes traversing some of these areas regardless of which realm you're at, but at least it does give you a sense of exploration, especially when, again, you fluctuate between linear areas where you know you only have one destination to go to in some of these environments, to other areas where it just full on opens up, and it keeps on opening up in a way where you don't, you know, if you've played Elden Ring at the beginning of this year, you might get some Elden Ring flashbacks where it's like the game's saying, well, you do have a compass and you do have a map, unlike that game, and you do have technically like a logbook, but at that point, wherever it is that you want to go over there. I wish that maybe they would have implicated some faster means of traversal, but that's the things that as I navigated more, I started to reel back a little bit from that complaint, because then it started to become a little easier to memorize some of these areas and some of these pockets, some of these open pockets that definitely, again, multiply themselves a bit more than the original game. The original game had the Lake of Nine, and that was mainly the area that was the most open. This one has like 3 or 4. Even in the later aspect of the game, you have areas that the game opens up even more. And even so, you have more aspects to your mechanics, whether it be gameplay, maneuvers, weapons that just build on top of that, like I mentioned before, that makes enemies encounters or exploration or puzzle mechanics much more susceptible to experimentation. Now, even though the puzzles could be argued as far as how of where in the scale they fall as far as difficulty, because that's the one thing that I will be potentially in the minority of, amongst many other minorities that I'm about to touch on a little bit later in the review, is that I do feel like the puzzles in the original God of War trilogy, God of War 1 through 3, are much better thought out than that of even either Ragnarok or the 2018 game. Sometimes you can just look at a glance at something and be like, well, I think I already know what I need to do, and it's just a matter of shooting the axe in a specific manner or lighting something up with the Blades of Chaos, and then telling Atreus to shoot a certain type of arrow in a certain direction, and then just take these things and just shuffle them around in a different order for other puzzles. And that's pretty much the gist of how to solve some of these puzzles in a particular combination. It's almost like you're just trying different combinations of the same mechanics over and over. And it gets, you still have this sense of accomplishment and this kind of pleasing OCD satisfaction thing, but I don't feel like smarter from completing some of these puzzles, like the way I was in the original God of War trilogy, or something that's a bit more puzzle themed, like something from Portal, etc., etc. It doesn't lean heavily into those sensibilities, but granted, that's not really where its heart truly lies. It lies more so on the combat and the experimentation of that combat. Now, I really hope that somebody who is to play this game, myself in this case, will love experimentation for the long run, because you're going to be doing it even in the late game, leading to one of my actual complaints about the game. Funny enough, the game is actually just as long as the 2018 game. It doesn't really, double itself up as far as hours. The game takes about 25 hours to do the main story, but about 40 or so to do the story, and then a hefty chunk of the side activities that I mentioned before, like the favors, most notably the ones that have more narrative implications, where a character says, hey, I have something to do. Do you want to do it before you move on? Because this thing, is very important to me. And then they would string me along, and I would actually be down with it, which is pretty much where I clocked in. Like I mentioned before, I clocked in at about 39 hours and 45 minutes, rounded off to an even 40. Even entering the third act, the game is still throwing new things at me. Again, no spoilers, but they range from mechanics, upgrades within upgrades, different ways to play the game, different things that you didn't know were coming at you, that, again, makes it a very difficult game to stream, which is probably why if anybody's streaming God of War Ragnarok right now, they're probably not going to get a high viewership, because a lot of people don't want the game spoiled. And it makes an awful lot of sense, because as I played, shit is just appearing on screen from a gameplay standpoint that even I wouldn't have wanted to know, so it's very difficult for someone to tune in and watch. I feel bad for anybody who is a main fan of like Jacksepticeye or something, because they're putting shit out there in their thumbnails, and if they were planning on playing the game, that's a tough one on them. But the game just packs on more and more showing up on the screen, and frankly, it packs it in a way where even I felt just a tad overwhelmed by how some of these mechanics have their own upgrade system. And here I am, 25 to 30 hours into the game, an awful lot of side stuff done, an awful lot of the story done, and the game is still giving me some tutorials on some shit. It felt less like it was in favor of the story and of the overall big picture, and felt more like the devs, because of what they confirmed before, and this is another thing that they confirmed leading up to the release of the game. They put it out there. Some people might not know, but the devs said it, so it's not technically a spoiler. But they mentioned that they meant to have Ragnarok be the culmination of the Norse saga, and that this is, it's all leading up to this. That's what's called Ragnarok. You don't make a game called Ragnarok without it climaxing, all of these threads of the Norse mythology all in one game. And I feel like they took that a little bit too much to heart as far as ideas from a narrative standpoint, a gameplay standpoint, and they try to pack all of these ideas into this game just a tad much. It's like when we recently had Thanksgiving and you have that one family member who made an amazing meal, amazing dishes, but you're full and they're still telling you, "Here, have some more, have some seconds," but you're starting to, not see straight, feeling a little nauseous even though the food was good and, well served. But they're still telling you, "Here, I made this extra thing." Actually, recently, me and my girlfriend had Thanksgiving, and after feasting and being full and almost falling into comas, her mom was already like, "Oh, who's ready for pie?" And I'm like, "Do you not see how lethargic and slow we are right now? Come on, give us a break." Come on. And that's kind of where I'm falling a little bit with the devs here and all the ideas they tried to pack so much into the late aspect of this game. This also in turn led to a bit of a slight pacing issue that wasn't there in the original. One that wasn't helped by the game choosing to flip between perspectives. Again, no spoilers. This wasn't in the trailers. I didn't know going into the game that this was happening, except for, like I mentioned before, one quick little thumbnail view from Girlfriend Reviews' stream that popped up in my feed when I opened the Twitch app. And it was because of this thumbnail that I knew this going into it, but I didn't know how far they were going to push with this flip of perspectives that I'll admit kind of threw the pacing off a little bit. Let's just say it kind of reminded me an awful lot of The Last of Us Part II, but unlike The Last of Us Part II, it at least varied itself so that it didn't feel so monotonous as Last of Us Part II, and also not so as depressing. So it was a bit more tolerable here. But I can totally understand if this did not float someone's boat. I think Solid Rev even mentioned in his video that he really disliked this, and I don't blame him. I didn't dislike it as much as him, but it did lead to a little bit of a pacing issue from a narrative standpoint. This also reminded me about how the game took on a much more hub world approach than the predecessor. And frankly, I know I feel like I'm falling much more on subjective tendencies here, but I just didn't prefer it. It didn't really vibe with me as well as how the original 2018 game had a much more clear destination and end goal for Atreus and Kratos' journey that not only did it make everything feel much more succinct, but it even favored the whole one-take shot illusion, because the original game, you literally had Kratos and Atreus trying to go from point A to point B so that they can scatter their mother's ashes in the highest peak of the realms. They had an end goal, they had the journey from beginning to end, kind of like Lord of the Rings style. This game has much more, like I said, of a hub world approach where our characters, again, trying to withhold details, but they're constantly going to a particular area to think of their next approach, think of their next move, their next thing that they need to do after doing this other thing, and back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. This combined with the flip of perspectives, again, it just didn't all vibe with me as well as the original game did, by just being a bit more streamlined and flowing a little bit more towards that end destination. And because of that, the RPG elements, the gameplay, and again, going back to that one-take shot, everything just flowed better within that first game. And here, it just felt like it was everyone trying to put in as many ideas into one package. And so many of the ideas, by result, or end up getting a little bit truncated. And this hub world, along with the flip of perspectives, are probably my two biggest problems with this game, that if I was to pick, quite honestly, I would say I would prefer the 2018 game original God of War than God of War Ragnarok. But that's if I have to pick, because trust me, when I say that this is very, very, very neck and neck as far as quality. If anything, this kind of reminds me of the old Godfather analogy, where in the movie industry, or at least in the movie culture, Godfather Parts 1 and 2, and I guess you could maybe say 3, is hailed as one of the best trilogies in motion picture history of all time, right? But a lot of people attribute Godfather Part 2 as one of the best sequels, being better than its predecessor. I'm actually in the minority. I've seen those two movies, and I love both movies, but I'm in the minority. This is actually the minority I was foreshadowing earlier, I'm in the minority of liking part 1 better than part 2 of The Godfather. But that's only by a smidge. They're both still great quality movies, but funny enough, I prefer Godfather Part 1 over 2 because of the same reason I prefer 2018 over Ragnarok, because of how much more streamlined and more direct that original journey was in that first entry than the second one. The second one even literally does the same thing of going back and forth in perspectives. It's a much longer movie, and because of that, we're going back and forth between time periods. We're following two different characters in those two journeys. Ragnarok even takes some pages from that book. I wouldn't even be surprised if some of the writers said and end up mentioning in interviews that they used Godfather Part 2 as some form of inspiration. And I would even make a theory of that. And I would put that here in some form of medium, that I theorize they used Godfather Part 2 as some sort of stepping stone to create Ragnarok. But that's just this is my own personal take, my own personal opinion. Nevertheless, though, like I said, despite that analogy, it's still the same case where both are objectively great games, and more so to the point, this is objectively one of the best games of the year, and probably my game of the year by default. No, I've still not played Elden Ring, and of course we got Callisto Protocol right around the corner here, but as it stands, this is, as far as quality is concerned, one of my games of the year, and standing very tall as far as that discussion for a couple of reasons. Because even though I had those two significant problems, and we had the uneven pacing problems that were different from its predecessor, whatever highs this game is able to hit are really big highs. Bigger than the original game, with sequel-worth additions like Odin, Thor, and the other 9 realms and other characters involved being explored, and in their vast beauty and complexity, you get to really soak in all this meticulous work from the designers, the sound designers, visual artists, programmers, motion capture, again, like I mentioned before, the performances and the voice work, everyone. Nothing is left just to kind of, overhaul. Like, even the night that I went to bed and had beaten the game, there was this little detail, and I can't really talk about it because it's a major spoiler, but there's a little detail within the gameplay that I acknowledged, and I'm like, yo, they didn't have to do that little detail, and they still fucking did it. And that's one of the things that makes this almost a labor of love. And the set pieces and boss fights, even if they're not as tough as other games like Elden Ring or any Souls-like for that matter, still deliver on the satisfaction you'd expect, and the side activities have enough meat on them narrative-wise that they pulled me away from the main quest long enough to make it a much more complete experience that left me at peace when I did finish the story. And it's a good thing I did, because enough emotional payoffs and twists happen toward the last act of this game that I would argue that they're more riveting than that of the previous game. There's some major twists and turns and shoe drops that I had to deal with back-to-back sleepless nights. Not to say that the game kept me up, but I willingly wanted to think more about this game and think about that one moment and that one line and how it resonated with me, and Kratos and Atreus' exchanges and where they went as far as characters from a writing standpoint, that I'm like, not only did it speak to me as just a gamer who just played the game, but also a creative who wants to go into the industry of writing film. Like, how can I take this as a lesson to write characters this way? It spoke to me in that way. And in those nights is where I was just lying in bed thinking about what just transpired and how I felt about it. Even now I'm thinking of how the true ending of the game, that real secret ending as they call it, that then rolls the entirety of the credits, made me not want to keep playing it anymore. Because even though the game does that thing where it's like, yeah, there's still unfinished business that you can go and roam around, but the cutscene that plays when you go into this quote-unquote secret ending, I put in quotes because it's not one of those secret endings where you have to 100% complete the game. You simply just have to do a side activity that is missable, but they drop hints that, hey, you should probably do this to be, to kind of bring a form of resolution. And good thing I did, because it leads to this ending cutscene that then rolls the credits and made me go like, yeah, I know that there's unfinished stuff, all these side quests, these favors, these labors, these chests to open, etc. But I don't want to. I want to leave it as it is, and I don't want to taint my experience witnessing that cutscene. And that's an amazing that's a sign of an amazing game finished right, and one that managed to make the areas in which it felt short forgivable. I mean, after all, one of the greatest themes in the game is about forgiveness and how some are able to learn to forgive while others lose the ability to do so. And that's just life. I thankfully haven't lost it yet, and after a year of slightly vapid gaming experiences of me just trying to get through my backlog, and some games I just kind of felt like I was going through the motions and I just wanted to get it done and over with, I thank God of War, Ragnarok, for bringing the gamer in me back with a zap of Thor's hammer. Folks, God of War Ragnarok, as it stands, is my game of the year. I know, I still have yet to play Elden Ring, Callisto Protocol, among others, but I can firmly stand and say that God of War Ragnarok gets a 9 out of 10 from me. It's only not a 9, it's not in 10 out of 10 like others felt obligated to give because of those shortcomings with the hub world, the pacing, and how it didn't really flow as clean and as pristine as the original 2018. Still, the fact that a game like this is possible, even after all the secrecy and then coming at a left turn and going, yeah, we're dropping this on November 9th, is still a wonder to behold, worthy of the Nordic gods. Folks, thank you so much for listening to my review of God of War Ragnarok. If you guys enjoyed it, please let me know by thumbing this up or liking it or whatever kind of function or system is at play through whatever podcast platform of your choice that you're listening through this. Or if you're listening to this as a video over on the YouTube channel for the Dark Spider Cast, make sure to hit the thumbs up button. Comment below what you guys thought of God of War Ragnarok if you have played it. If you have not, are you looking forward to playing it? And please keep it spoiler free because this was, after all, a spoiler free review. So please be considerate. Otherwise, I am done, and thankfully I can now check out the other reviews and spoiler discussions for the game and finally get this out of the backlog, and looking forward to maybe getting Elden Ring started, Callisto Protocol played, among other things in my backlog, and hopefully I'll be back with my discussion on Callisto Protocol and my top 5 games of 2022. I bid you guys farewell, and as always, stay humble. I'll see you later.
Death can have me when it earns me.
What do you even know of godhood? In your lifetimes, has anyone ever worshipped you? Ever prayed to you? Can you even imagine that kind of love? No! You don't care about anything beyond yourself. Beyond the monster who kills without cause.